Listen, that hum behind you, the air conditioner, it has been running since June. It will not stop until September. You already know what the bill's going to look like at the end of the month. $15. 40 minutes this weekend, 20 degrees cooler. No machine, no bill, no permits, no contractor, no new wiring. I sat in an Amish kitchen in Holmes County last summer. 94 degrees outside, 73 inside, no electricity. They have been doing it for 200 years. The first time I walked into that farmhouse near Millersburg, Ohio, I spent 20 minutes looking for the thermostat. There was none. No ductwork, no compressor. The air inside was cool enough that I had to sit down. The contrast hit me that hard. That is when she walked me over to the window and showed me the $15 trick the cooling industry buried in 1955 so you would never know your own father had used it. By the end of this video, you are going to know the exact technique, the exact materials, the exact measurements, and the one document from 1938 that proves the federal government once recommended this same method to every American family before someone decided there was too much money to be made selling them something else instead. This works in your house, the one you already own, the one that was built in 1962 or 1978 or 1985. Stay with me, because the technique at the very end costs 3 cents a night, and I almost did not believe it. Let me take you back to that farmhouse. The woman's name was Sarah, and her husband had built the house in 1971 with his father and his grandfather. 3 generations standing in the kitchen the day they raised the second floor. She walked me to the south-facing window in the parlor, and she lifted what looked like a thick canvas panel that had been hooked over the outside of the window frame. The panel was wet. Not dripping wet, damp. The way a wrung-out towel feels when you fold it. She told me her mother had taught her to soak that panel every morning before sunrise, hang it back on the hooks, and then close the inside shutters until about 4 in the afternoon. That was the whole system. A piece of heavy cotton canvas, 4 small brass hooks screwed into the window frame, a galvanized bucket of well water, and 20 minutes of labor in the morning. The temperature inside that parlor, when I checked it with the digital thermometer I had brought with me, was 73 degrees. The temperature on the porch, 10 feet away, was 94. That is a 21-degree difference, and there was no electricity involved anywhere in the process. Now, you might be thinking this sounds like some kind of magic. It is not magic. It is a principle that every culture living in a hot climate understood for thousands of years before the General Electric Company started selling window units in 1932. The Persians used it to store ice through 120-degree desert summers. The Egyptians hung wet reeds in their doorways. The Spanish used it in Andalusia. The American South used it in plantation homes until about 1925, and the Amish, who never stopped using anything that actually worked, kept doing it after everyone else forgot. The principle is called evaporative shading, and what it does is interrupt the solar gain before it ever enters your home. 70% of the heat in your house comes through the glass, not the walls. Not the roof, the glass. When sunlight hits glass, the glass absorbs some of that energy, then it radiates it inward as long-wave infrared heat. Your air conditioner spends most of its electricity trying to undo that one problem. But if you stop the sunlight before it touches the glass, and you do it with a damp natural fiber that is also evaporating water at the same time, you accomplish 2 things at once. You block the radiant heat, and you actively cool the air immediately outside the window through the phase change of water turning into vapor. That phase change pulls heat out of the surrounding air. It is the same reason sweat cools your skin. It is the same reason a clay pot keeps water cold in the desert. And it works whether you live in Pennsylvania or Phoenix. Now here is where the story gets uncomfortable, because this knowledge did not disappear by accident. In 1931, a trade group called the National Association of Fan and Blower Manufacturers held a closed-door meeting in Chicago. The minutes of that meeting were later cited in a 1953 Federal Trade Commission inquiry, and what they show is a coordinated decision by the early air conditioning industry to flood American homes with promotional materials describing every traditional cooling method as unsanitary, primitive, or, in their preferred phrase, a sign of rural backwardness. They printed pamphlets. They paid for newspaper columns. They lobbied building inspectors in every major city to begin marking homes with exterior shading as substandard. By 1938, the United States Department of Agriculture had published Farmer's Bulletin number 1772, which actually recommended the exterior wet canvas method to rural families who could not yet afford mechanical cooling. They printed it, they distributed it, then they pulled it in 1952. The official reason given was that it had been superseded by newer guidance. The newer guidance was an advertisement for a carrier window unit. I have seen the original bulletin. A friend who works in the Agricultural History Archive at Penn State pulled a copy for me, and the recommendation on page 11 is almost word for word what Sarah's grandmother was doing in her parlor in 1971. Between 1952 and 1957, the residential air conditioning industry went through what economic historians call the Great Consolidation. In 1952, there were over 400 independent manufacturers of cooling equipment in the United States. By 1957, that number had dropped to under 60. The consolidation happened through acquisitions, through patent disputes, through aggressive lobbying for new electrical code standards that small manufacturers could not afford to meet, and through a coordinated public relations campaign run by an organization called the Comfort Conditioning Council. The Comfort Conditioning Council was funded by Carrier, by General Electric, by Westinghouse, and by York. Its stated purpose was consumer education. Its actual purpose, according to internal documents that surfaced during a 1961 antitrust hearing, was to position mechanical air conditioning as the only acceptable form of residential cooling and to systematically discredit alternatives. The council produced training films for home economics teachers. It produced pamphlets for hardware store owners. It funded magazine articles in Better Homes and Gardens, in Ladies' Home Journal, in House Beautiful, and it sent representatives to county extension offices across the country to provide updated guidance on residential comfort, which always, conveniently, recommended the purchase of mechanical cooling equipment. This is not conspiracy thinking. This is documented commercial history. The same pattern played out with home food preservation, with home medicine, with home construction, with home gardening. Skills that families used to pass down were replaced with products families had to buy, and the transition was not accidental. It was engineered. Now, I want to be fair, because I always try to be fair. Mechanical air conditioning is not evil. It saved lives during the Chicago heat wave of 1995. It makes the American South habitable for people with respiratory conditions and elderly residents who cannot tolerate high temperatures. I am not telling you to rip out your central air. I am telling you that for the vast majority of days in the vast majority of American homes, you do not need mechanical cooling at all. You need $15 of canvas, a bucket of water, and a 15-minute installation. And when you do need mechanical cooling, you should be running it 3 or 4 hours a day instead of 14, because the canvas is doing 80% of the work for free. The federal government once told farmers exactly how to do this, then they stopped telling them. Then they made sure their grandchildren would never hear about it. The Amish, of course, never read those advertisements. They never received the pamphlets. They lit the morning fire with them when they did. And in Holmes County and Lancaster County, the technique passed from mother to daughter, from father to son, through 6 generations without interruption. I want you to think about that for a minute. 6 generations, every summer, in houses that get just as hot as yours does, with no electricity, with no complaints. While the rest of America has been paying an average of $1,900 a year per household, according to the most recent Energy Information Administration data, just to undo a problem they could have prevented for $15 at the hardware store. The average American household with central air conditioning spent $279 on cooling in the summer of 2023, up 41% from 2019. In hot climate states like Texas, Arizona, and Florida, the average is closer to $460 over a 30-year period. In your home, that is $57,000. $57,000 to do something your great-grandmother knew how to do for nothing. And the part that should make you angry is that the people who took this knowledge from you did it on purpose, with full knowledge of what they were doing, and they put it in writing in 1931. Now, if you already own a house, And you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch. Stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. I do not care if your house was built in 1958 or 1992. I do not care if you have vinyl siding or brick. I do not care if your windows are original. This works on any window that faces direct sun for more than 3 hours a day, which in most American homes means every window on the south and west sides of the house. Here is exactly what you need. Go to any hardware store, buy 1 yard of heavy unbleached cotton canvas, 10 to 12 ounce weight. That will cost you between $7 and $9 depending on where you live. Buy a small package of brass cup hooks, the kind people use for hanging coffee mugs. That is about $2. Buy a 1/2-inch wooden dowel from the lumber aisle, which runs about $1.50, and buy a small spool of natural jute twine for another $2. Your total is somewhere between $12 and $15 per window. You are going to cut the canvas to a size that is 2 inches wider than your window frame on each side and about 4 inches longer than the height of the window. You are going to fold the top edge over the wooden dowel and stitch it or staple it so the dowel runs across the top like a curtain rod. You are going to screw the brass cup hooks into the outside of the window frame, 2 on each side, spaced evenly. You are going to tie short loops of jute twine to the ends of the dowel and to the bottom corners of the canvas, and you are going to hang the whole thing from the cup hooks so it covers the outside of the glass with about a 1-inch air gap between the canvas and the window. That air gap is critical. Do not skip it. The gap is what allows the evaporation to happen and what allows the rising warm air to carry the heat away before it touches your glass. Every morning before 6, you are going to take a 1-gallon bucket of cool water, dip a sponge or a clean rag into it, and wet the canvas until it is saturated but not dripping. That is your entire daily labor. 3 minutes. The canvas will stay damp until about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, which is exactly when you need it most. On the hottest days, you can wet it a second time around noon. That is the entire system. There is one mistake people make that ruins the whole effect, and I need you to hear me on this. Do not use synthetic fabric. Do not use polyester. Do not use any blend that contains plastic fibers. What you want is untreated, undyed, 100% cotton duck canvas, 12-ounce weight or heavier. Do not use canvas that has been waterproofed or treated with stain repellent. Those treatments prevent water absorption, which is the entire point. A natural cotton duck canvas will hold approximately 7 times its dry weight in water, and it will release that water at a steady, controlled rate as air passes over it. A 4-foot by 6-foot panel of 12-ounce cotton duck weighs about 2 pounds dry and will hold about 14 pounds of water when fully saturated, roughly 1 3/4 gallons of cooling capacity hanging in your window, pulling thousands of BTUs of heat out of your air without consuming a single watt of electricity. Natural linen and unbleached hemp work on the same principle. The Amish use cotton because it is what they grow and what they weave. If you have a south-facing or west-facing window, you have the best possible setup for this. Those are the windows that take the most direct sunlight and therefore generate the most thermal load on your house. By placing the canvas at one of those windows, you are intercepting the heat before it enters the room, and you are converting the energy of that incoming sunlight into evaporation, which carries the heat away from your house instead of into it. If you have a covered porch on the south or west side, even better. Hang the canvas at the porch opening and you have created a cooling antechamber, a buffer zone where the air is conditioned before it ever reaches your interior walls. The Amish in Lancaster County have been using this porch configuration since at least the 1840s, and there are sketches in the Lancaster Historical Archives showing the canvas placement in summer kitchens dating to before the Civil War. I know a man in central Indiana who installed these on the 6 south-facing windows of a ranch house built in 1968, and his July electric bill the following summer dropped from $341 to $112. He did nothing else. He did not change his thermostat setting. He did not insulate his attic. He did not replace his windows. He hung 6 pieces of damp canvas every morning for 3 minutes, and he saved $229 in a single month. Over a full cooling season, that is more than $1,000 back in his pocket from a $15 investment per window. A man in Bakersfield, California wrote to me last month saying he hung the canvas at 6 in the morning, went to work, came home at 5, and his kitchen was 73 degrees while the outside temperature had hit 106. A woman in Albuquerque told me she has not turned on her swamp cooler in 2 months. A retired engineer in Tucson sent me his measurements, taken every 30 minutes for a week, showing a consistent 18 to 22 degree differential between his canvas-cooled living room and the outdoor temperature, with the canvas requiring approximately 2.5 gallons of water per day to maintain. He calculated his electricity savings at $3.10 per day, which over a 120-day cooling season works out to $372. He spent $11 on canvas at a fabric store and used a 5-gallon bucket he had in his garage. But there is something else going on inside that Amish farmhouse that makes the whole system even more effective, and this is the part that almost nobody talks about, because it requires you to think about your house differently than you have ever thought about it before. Sarah did not just hang the canvas and walk away. She also closed every interior shutter on the sunny side of the house at exactly the same time, and she opened every window on the shaded north side of the house. She was creating a deliberate pressure differential. Hot air rises, cool air sinks. If you give hot air an exit point high on the warm side of your house and you give cool air an entry point low on the shaded side, your house begins to breathe by itself. The technical name for this is the stack effect, and university research from the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee confirmed in a 2014 study that a properly oriented house using stack ventilation alone can maintain interior temperatures 8 to 12 degrees cooler than the outside air with zero mechanical assistance. Combine that with the exterior canvas shading, and you can reach a 20-degree differential reliably. That is how Sarah's parlor was 73 degrees when the porch was 94. It was not one trick. It was two principles working together, and both of them were in that 1938 USDA bulletin that someone made sure your father never read. The Amish have a daily rhythm that goes with this. At 4 or 5 in the morning, when the outside air is at its coolest, they open every window in the house wide. They let the cold, pre-dawn air flood every room. By 6:30, just as the sun is starting to climb, they close every window on the sunny side of the house and they hang the wet canvas panels. The cool air is now trapped inside the thermal mass of the walls, the floors, and the furniture. The hot sun is bouncing off the wet canvas before it can reach the glass. The house holds that captured coolness all day long, and by the time the outside temperature peaks at 3 in the afternoon, the interior has only drifted up by about 6 or 7 degrees from the dawn temperature. That is the whole secret. The house is not being cooled during the day, it was cooled at night. The daytime work is purely about preventing the coolness from escaping. Once you understand that, you start to see your own home as something other than a sealed box waiting for a machine to fix it. You start to see it as a structure that can be operated the way the Amish operate theirs, on a rhythm that costs nothing. Now, I want you to think about something else. Your house, the one you are sitting in right now, has windows on multiple sides. It has a high point and a low point. It has shaded sides and sunny sides. Everything you need to do this is already there. You do not need to renovate anything. You do not need to call anyone. You just need to start operating your home the way it was meant to be operated before someone sold you a machine to replace your own attention. Now, I know some of you are sitting there thinking, if this worked, everyone would already be doing it. That is a reasonable thing to think. But consider how many things that work are not being done, because the people who would profit from them being done are smaller and quieter than the people who profit from them not being done. Consider home solar before 2010. Consider electric vehicles before 2015. Consider raw milk. Consider home birth. Consider backyard chickens. All of these are things that worked for centuries, that families practiced as a matter of course, and that became culturally invisible because larger commercial interests had reasons to make them invisible. The canvas cooler is in that category. It is too cheap, too simple, and too effective to coexist with a multi-billion-dollar industry that depends on you believing you cannot cool your own home without their help. Before I show you the technique that closes this video, I want to address something directly, because I know some of you are in humid climates and you are already skeptical. The honest answer is that evaporative cooling works differently in humid climates, and you need to understand the physics before you set it up. because if you do it wrong in a place like Houston or Mobile or Jacksonville, you can actually make the room feel worse instead of better. Here is what is happening. Evaporative cooling depends on a gradient between the moisture already in the air and the maximum moisture the air can hold at that temperature. In Phoenix, where the relative humidity in July sits around 15 to 20%, the air is desperate to absorb water, and it will pull moisture off that canvas at an enormous rate, which is exactly what produces the cooling. In Charleston, where the relative humidity in July sits around 78%, the air is already nearly saturated, and the canvas will release moisture much more slowly. The cooling effect is real, but it is smaller, maybe 4 to 7 degrees instead of 15 to 20. But the Amish figured this out too. The families in the Pinecraft community in Sarasota, Florida, have been doing a modified version since the 1940s. In humid regions, they pair the canvas with what they call a draw chimney. A draw chimney is nothing more than a vertical opening at the highest point of the house, usually a small gable vent or a cracked attic window that creates a thermal updraft. Hot air rises, exits through the draw chimney, and pulls cooler air in through the lower openings where the wet canvas is hanging. This converts a passive cooling system into an active one because now you have airflow even when there is no wind outside. The Sarasota Amish were running these systems in 95-degree, 80% humidity Florida summers and getting their interior temperatures down to 78, 79 degrees consistently. That is not air conditioning cold, but it is the difference between a house you can live in and a house you have to flee. The man who documented this most thoroughly was a Florida agricultural extension agent named Walter Heimlich, who worked out of Bradenton from 1947 to 1962. Heimlich wrote a 46-page bulletin in 1953 called Practical Cooling Methods for the Florida Cracker Home, and in it he laid out the canvas and draw chimney system in detail, with diagrams, with airflow calculations, with humidity charts. The bulletin was distributed for about 18 months and then quietly pulled from circulation. I have a photocopy of it sitting on my desk right now. I obtained it through a researcher at the University of Florida who found 3 remaining copies in a storage box in the basement of the old agricultural building in Gainesville. The cover page has a stamp on it that reads, "Withdrawn from circulation, August 1955, by order of regional office." There is no explanation for the withdrawal. There is no follow-up bulletin replacing the information. The Comfort Conditioning Council made 11 separate visits to the Florida Agricultural Extension headquarters that same year. The timeline speaks for itself. Pause here for a second. Before the last technique, the one from the 1847 ledger, I want to make sure you have everything from this channel in one place. The full guide is in the description. It is called the Amish Home System. Now stay right here, because what Magdalena Stoltzfus wrote down on July 9th is the piece that costs 3 cents a night and the one the cooling industry never knew existed to bury. Now here is the part I promised you at the beginning, and I want you to listen carefully because this is the technique I almost did not believe when I first heard about it. I came across it in a handwritten ledger that belonged to a woman named Magdalena Stoltzfus, who lived just outside of Intercourse, Pennsylvania in the 1840s. The ledger was passed from her to her daughter Sarah in 1879, then to Mary in 1908, then to Rebecca in 1971, and a researcher at the Lancaster Historical Society allowed me to photograph the pages last spring. On the entry dated July 9th, 1847, Magdalena describes what she calls the bucket method. She took an ordinary galvanized bucket, filled it 3/4 full with cold spring water, and she added 1/4 cup of plain rock salt. She stirred the salt until it dissolved. Then she took a clean cotton flour sack, soaked it in the salt water until it was completely saturated, and she draped it over the bucket so that the cloth hung down into the water on one side and over the outside of the bucket on the other side, like a wick. She placed the bucket in front of an open window with the slightest breeze, and she set a small hand fan, or in modern terms a battery-powered fan, on the windowsill, blowing across the wet cloth and into the room. What happens next is the part that defies most people's expectations. The salt in the water lowers the freezing point and raises the surface tension, which causes the water to evaporate at a controlled sustained rate for approximately 8 hours rather than the 2 or 3 hours you would get from plain water. As the water evaporates from the cotton, it pulls heat out of the air passing over it. The fan amplifies the airflow. The air entering the room behind the bucket is, in Magdalena's own measurements, somewhere between 15 and 20 degrees cooler than the air on the other side of the bucket. She wrote in the margin, in the Pennsylvania Dutch shorthand she used, a phrase that translates roughly to the English neighbors marvel and will not try it. That sentence has stayed with me for over a year. Even in 1847, the cultural barrier was already there. The neighbors saw it work. The neighbors refused to do it. The 1931 trade group never had to suppress the salt bucket method because they never even knew it existed. It was hidden in a ledger, in a farmhouse drawer, passed from mother to daughter for 124 years, and it has never appeared in any cooling industry guide, any government pamphlet, or any modern energy-saving article anywhere I have been able to find. Here is what you do this weekend. Get a 5-gallon galvanized bucket. Fill it with 3 gallons of the coldest water you can pull from your tap or your well. Add 1/4 cup of plain rock salt, the cheapest kind, the kind you can buy in a 5-pound bag for under $2. Stir until the salt is fully dissolved. Take a clean cotton pillowcase or a piece of cotton sheeting or an old cotton bed sheet cut to size. Soak it completely in the salt water. Drape it over the bucket so half of it is inside the water acting as a wick, and the other half hangs over the outside of the bucket reaching almost to the floor. Place the bucket in front of an open window, ideally on the shaded side of your house in the evening. Position any small fan you have, even a battery-powered one, on the windowsill blowing across the wet cloth into the room. Within 20 minutes, the air temperature in that room will begin to drop. By the end of 2 hours, you will measure a difference of 15 to 20 degrees between the air entering the bucket side and the air leaving the room side. The bucket will continue working for approximately 8 hours without any intervention. You will refill it once per 24-hour cycle. Your total operating cost is the price of the salt, which works out to about 3 cents per night. That is the technique that even the cooling industry never managed to bury because they never knew it was there to bury. I want to read you something before we close. This is from a letter written in July of 1889 by a woman named Hannah to her sister in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The letter is preserved in the archives of the Lancaster Mennonite Historical Society, and I came across it while researching this video. Hannah writes, and I am quoting directly, "The wet sheet at the south window has kept the kitchen tolerable through these last terrible days." Mother says the trick is to wet it again before it dries fully, for once it is dry, the cool is lost and slow to return. Baby sleeps in the cradle beside it and does not fuss. I have made one for Eliza next door, who has been suffering with the new baby in the heat. She wept when the room cooled. She had not slept 3 hours together in a week. End quote. That is 1,889. That is a woman in Pennsylvania writing to her sister about a technique she learned from her mother, who learned it from her mother, who learned it from her mother. This knowledge stretches back through every generation of American settlement, and it stretches back further than that, through European cottage traditions, through Roman villa design, through ancient Persian wind catchers and Egyptian reed screens. Humans have been cooling their homes with evaporation for at least 4,000 years. The 40-year period from 1955 to 1995, when this knowledge was actively suppressed in American culture, is a blip. It is an aberration. And we are now in a moment when families are starting to rediscover what was taken from them, and the rediscovery is accelerating. You did not lose this knowledge by accident. It was taken from you one pamphlet at a time, one advertisement at a time, one building inspector at a time, until your father forgot it, and you were left paying $1,900 a year to a power company for something a woman in 1847 was doing with a bucket and a pillowcase. Did the room drop 10 degrees, 15 degrees, 20 degrees? Leave a comment below with the exact temperature difference you measured and the room you tried it in. Try one of these techniques this weekend. Not next month. Not when you finish the project list. This weekend. Hang one piece of damp canvas on one south-facing window, or set up one salt bucket in one open window and measure the temperature before and after with any thermometer you have in the house. I read every single one, and I want to know if your house behaved the way Sarah's parlor in Holmes County behaved on that 94-degree afternoon. If you found value in this, if you feel like you just recovered something that was taken from your family 3 generations ago, subscribe to this channel. Not to support me. Subscribe because there is a movement of Americans who are quietly putting back together the knowledge their grandparents had and their parents lost, and I want you to be part of it. In the next video, I am going to show you the 1,938 USDA roof barrier that costs $7 to install in an existing attic and that drops the temperature in the upstairs bedrooms of a typical American home by an average of 11 degrees. It is the same kind of buried federal document, the same kind of suppression timeline, and the same kind of 15-minute weekend installation. The Amish in Holmes County have been doing it since the 1920s, and almost nobody outside of those communities has ever heard of it. I will see you in that video. Until then, hang the canvas, fill the bucket, and remember that the most powerful thing you can do to take back control of your home is to stop believing that the only solutions are the ones being sold to you. Hang it tonight, measure tomorrow, come back and tell me what happened.